Welcome to the Content 10X Podcast, the show where content creators learn how to harness the power of content repurposing. And now, your host, Amy Woods.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Content 10X Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, and thank you for joining me in this week's podcast episode. Now, this week's episode is about the mindset that you need to have to be an efficient and effective content repurposer. Now, I truly believe that whilst I can provide you with lots of specific tips and tricks for repurposing all sorts of different types of content and let you know about tools and resources that will help you, the underlying aspects of all of this that will really help you succeed is developing a content repurposing mindset. You'll be so more effective in terms of how you plan and strategize and create content, and so more effective in terms of working out how you can repurpose that content if you are really able to develop a repurposing mindset. So as I said, that's what I'm going to talk about in this week's podcast episode. Now, before I dig in, I'm just going to give a shout out to today's sponsor, which is Content 10X, the book. So more content, less time at maximum results, which is my book. Now, I'm sure you were thinking, what? The show's got a sponsor? I've never heard that before. Obviously, I'm just joking a little bit. So it is not the sponsor, it is my book. But I wanted to let you know that the book is now available in paperback, Kindle, ebook, and also audiobook as well. So there's something for everyone now. And it's on Amazon, but it's also available on Barnes & Noble online, Google Play, Apple, Audible, and Kobo as well. So lots of different ways to consume the book and different places to purchase the book as well. It's been out now since October the 23rd, and I've been getting lots of really positive reviews from people, both on Amazon and also just coming into my inbox and on social media as well. So I wanted to share with you one of the reviews that I recently got, which was from Francesca Holton. She said, "I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's jam-packed full of tips for making the most of your content. I've been thinking about starting a podcast for years now, but worried that it wouldn't be worth the effort, especially with all the competition out there. But thanks to this book, I now understand how you can take one piece of content and repurpose it into so many different ways of reaching as many people as possible. This is a must-have guide for every content creator." So Francesca Holton, if you're listening to the show, thank you so much for that review. And I just wanted to share that in terms of what you may be able to get from this book, whether you're trying to start new content from scratch or you're a prolific content creator but know that you can get more from it. Head to content10x.com/book if you want to get your copy. Now on to the main part of the show, which I mentioned is all about content repurposing and mindset. So last month I spoke at Repurposing Summit in London, a great event put on by Chris Ducker. And when planning the talk, it was a little bit different to talks I've done before because the audience was really varied. I've spoken at 2 podcasting events this year. And when I spoke at those events, I knew that everybody was a podcaster. So I was able to really focus on how you can repurpose your podcast. So at Podcast Movement, Podfest, it was very much aimed at helping podcasters with that aspect of repurposing. And then I spoke at Retain event very recently in September, and that was an event for membership site owners. So I was able to speak about repurposing membership site content. But when I was preparing for Repurposing Summit, I knew that there would be podcasters, membership site owners, vloggers, bloggers, live streamers, authors, people just getting started, people who are really well underway, and everything in between as well. So a key feature of pretty much everyone, because of why they were there, most likely were a business owner, and through following Chris, most likely had an understanding of content marketing and an appreciation of the importance of content, but a really varied audience. So I decided that one thing that is applicable to everyone in order to effectively repurpose content, regardless of what your main core content is that you must have a content repurposing mindset. Now, I believe that you need to fundamentally change how you view your content so that you're able to see beyond its original intention, audience format, and see the potential that it possesses. You can view content simply as a way of packaging up a message, because that's essentially what content is. And just because you've packaged it up in one way doesn't mean that you can't then package that message up in another way too. So when I spoke at Youpreneur Summit, I asked the audience at my talk, how many of you know Spider-Man, and made the point that they have likely watched the TV shows and the movies, bought the toys, played the games, bought merchandise and everything else in the world of Spider-Man. But how many of them had actually read the original comic books created by Stan Lee in the 1960s? And the answer was, not that many people, but everybody was aware of Spider-Man. So imagine if the backstory of Spider-Man and all the adventures that he gets up to hadn't grown and evolved beyond those original comics created by Stan Lee, then so many people may not have even recognised who Spider-Man was. And my point being that content is exactly the same. There's so much that your content can become and so much potential within your content if you can expand on it, grow on it and reimagine it in many cases. So firstly, I want you to remember, and I've said this before many times if you've tuned into the show before, and thank you very much if you have, that content repurposing starts at the planning phase. Create content with repurposing in mind. Think about what your content will become, because you will find you create it very differently if you know what you are turning it into. So don't let content repurposing become an afterthought. For example, if you have video content and you know you are repurposing it into, say, a podcast episode, you'll likely be more mindful of the audio quality. You'll be mindful of what you say and how you present because you're thinking of the audio-only listeners. And it's good to ensure that there aren't visual aspects and it's not too visually dependent. And if you do have parts of the video that are visual, then being able to segment that section nicely so that you can edit that bit out for a podcast audience. And then maybe if you're going to go on and create short little videos for social media, you'll want to make sure you are making points really clear and introducing topics within the main topic that kind of can stand alone so you can use those video clips to share on their own on different social media platforms. Now, when I was talking at Youpreneur Summit, I shared this really great example of epic repurposing done by Jay Bear for the Talk Triggers show. So Jay is a client of ours at Content 10X, and we worked really closely with him and his team to bring the Talk Triggers show to life. But there was so much more content that came from Talk Triggers show, both before and after. It was this big journey of repurposing. And I talked to Jay about this on episode 101 of the Content 10X podcast. And I really recommend that you go and listen to that, content10x.com/101, because Jay shared basically in a nutshell that the repurposing went from research to a keynote talk, to a book, to the weekly video show, the weekly podcast, and then all the social media content, videos and graphics, a weekly blog post, and there was even a Facebook group created from this content as well. So much came from that content. But one thing that happened here was that it didn't just, happen by chance. It was planned in advance from a really well-developed content repurposing mindset of that planning out what the content's going to become and then working out how you will create it with that repurposing in mind. And then on the other hand, the mindset that will help you out as well is having a really open-minded view of your content and being able to take opportunities as they come along. So a great example here is the award-winning podcast called My Dad Wrote a Porno. And I talked about this in podcast episode 37, so content10x.com/37, about this amazing podcast, this comedy podcast. So it's not a pornographic podcast, it's a comedy podcast. But the story there was that it was originally a book that this guy called Jamie Morton, his father, had written an erotic novel, and he brought it to his son and he said to him, would you have a read? What do you think of it? And his son read it with his friends, and it was terrible in terms of erotic literature, but it was unintentionally hilarious because it was so bad. So right there, they saw this repurposing opportunity to repurpose this, poorly written, therefore hilarious erotic novel into a comedy podcast where they would read out a chapter of this book every week as an episode and just really really have fun and joke around and create this comedy podcast. So they spotted the opportunity there, that repurposing opportunity. But this podcast wasn't just any podcast. It's gone on to become one of the most popular podcasts ever. It's had millions of downloads and it's won all sorts of awards. And then what has it gone on to? So they were able to take it to a live stage show, and it's been in theatres all over the world, from the Sydney Opera House, London, New York, all over the place as a live stage show. They then got an HBO TV deal where it's been turned into an HBO TV special. And then there's all this merchandise as well that's come from it and so much more. And every single aspect of that wasn't actually planned. They didn't know that it was going to become an HBO TV series or a live show. They didn't know the success of the podcast. And his dad, of course, he didn't know all of the entire My Dad Wrote a Porno side of things was going to come from his original erotic literature. So this is another mindset, which is that you need to be open to opportunities that come your way. So what I like to say is that it's almost like treating your content like a startup. With startups, when you think about what the key aspects are, yes, they need to plan, meticulously plan. They need to have, 1-year plans, 5-year plans, financial projections, and they need to have goals and know where they are heading and plan and plan and plan. But by very nature of being a startup, a real benefit is that they can be nimble, they can be agile and respond to customer feedback, to the environment, to the industry, to the reaction of what they're putting out there. And they can respond quicker than some of the more incumbent, longer term organizations that have been around. So they have to blend both. They have to plan, but they have to be nimble as well in order to succeed. And that's what you should be like with your content as well. Create that content from the Talk Triggers Jay Bear example I just provided, where you plan in advance and you think about what you're going to repurpose your content into, and you have that content repurposing mindset of just even initially seeing what the potential of this content can be. But be really open-minded as well to the opportunities that you may never even have envisaged would come your way, but do through content, through putting yourself out there and creating content in different formats and in different locations to reach and impact as many people as possible. So that is what I believe is the mindset that you need to have with your content. So stepping aside from tools and resources and techniques and thinking about it from a mindset perspective, because if you have the right mindset and you can view content in that way, I promise you'll be onto a winning streak with your content creation endeavors. Now, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Content 10X podcast. I really do appreciate it. If you like the show, please do subscribe and leave a review. Don't forget to grab a copy of my book, Content 10X. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Audible now. It can be also just found by heading to content10x.com/book. If you're interested in our end-to-end content repurposing services here at Content 10X, then do head on over to our website as well, content10x.com, to find out more. And don't forget to follow me on social media as well. I'm at Content 10X on all of the main social media platforms. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.